Good morning. We are here with Kash Jackson, who is the Libertarian Party nominee candidate for the Illinois governor's race. We appreciate you being here today, and we would invite you to start this meeting by providing an opening statement about why you're running and why you feel you're the best candidate for governor.
Thank you guys so much for having me today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Grayson Kash Jackson. Everybody calls me Kash. I was born Benjamin Adam Winderweedle, and I did a legal name change in 2016 after I left the United States military. I was raised by my maternal grandparents, and their last name was Jackson. And my paternal side, they were big Johnny Cash fans, and they played folk music all over the country. And after leaving the military, it was something I was already heavily considering doing. And so I went ahead and made that change to Grayson Kash Jackson, and everybody just calls me Kash. I went into politics primarily because of the experiences that I've seen and dealt with through the family law court system and the struggles that I have endured fighting to be a father to my children. After 4 years of litigation and going through that, I've really gained a tremendous insight into the judicial system and how it treats families and our children, and I wanted to do something about that. And that was kind of the segue into me looking at other areas of government, and because I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I wear that on my sleeve very passionately. I've lost friends in combat and otherwise, and so whenever our Constitution is violated, it troubles me deeply. And I felt that I have the capacities and the skill sets and the talent necessary to run for governor. And so I've done so. I sought the nomination from the Libertarian Party. I earned that in a contested three-way race. And now I'm in a contested four-way race for the governorship. And I feel that I have the skills necessary to lead Illinois to a better and brighter future.
Okay.
So before we delve into the issues, I'd just like to kind of step back and ask you to share with us how you became a libertarian, and then what are a couple of principles that you would hold dear and other libertarians would, and then how would they play out in the state capitol?
Okay. So I became a libertarian. I really began looking into it back around 2015, early 2016, whenever I was still stationed in Washington State. A friend of mine who was a Republican was going to a Libertarian chapter meeting in Sept County and invited me to go. And as I sat and I listened to, kind of their philosophy and what they believed, it really resonated with me. I said, you know what, that sounds a lot like me, because I've been very conservative, very Republican most of my life. But the more that they talk, the more I listen, and I'm like, yeah, I agree with, the rights of the individual trump that of groups, and that people should be able to live as they choose, so long as they don't hurt other people. And that when we talk about being fiscally conservative, it doesn't mean with Republicans, I don't believe, necessarily what it does to libertarians. And so we don't use the term conservative. We say fiscally responsible, that we're going to be responsible with people's money, that whatever taxation we do place upon our citizens, that money is spent wisely and appropriated necessarily to the functions and the capacities that are needed by our state. And so that's kind of really what led me down the path to libertarianism. And the more I got involved, the more it just really hit home that I'm doing the right thing. This is the right party, and I really believe that most people are libertarian. They just don't realize it. And many people on the left and the right that I talk to say, "Yeah, I'm libertarian." Even elected officials, and they say, "Yeah, I'm really libertarian. It's just easier to run as a Republican or a Democrat." And well, I did 20 years in the military. I don't do easy. I tend to take the hard path, and because I feel that makes me a better man at the end of the day. And how do I feel that that's going to impact? I'm sorry, the last part of your question.
Yeah, how would that play out when you're elected governor?
Well, I think that it would be an added benefit to state politics that we've never enjoyed, and that is where we don't have somebody in the senior most executive position in our state that doesn't answer to a party boss and has the ability to find common ground with people on the left and the right. Because Where we stand socially, again, we believe that you should be able to live out your life however you choose without government interference. And so in the areas of, gay rights or civil rights, we've been advocating for that since our inception in 1971. And we didn't do it when it was politically convenient. And of course, I'm speaking to the entirety of the party and its philosophy before I ever came around. But that's important. We ran the first gay candidate, I believe, in 1972. And so we've always advocated for those civil and social issues. The ability for oneself to choose what you put in your own body should not be government's choice. So if it's a matter of, life and death, the right to try law that Donald Trump signed into place, why do we need that legislation? It's your body, and if you're dying, you should be able to do what is necessary to try and survive. And so these types of things would really benefit us in politics at the Capitol. And then on the right, I'm a strong constitutionalist, believe in the Constitution, swore to support and defend it for 20 years. And again, I'm very passionate because I've seen the sacrifices by family and service members for that. And so that is very appealing to those on the right. So I have those skill sets where I can build relationships and rapport with legislators on both sides of the political aisle. And I think that that's a unique position that would really benefit our state.
Thank you.
You brought this up in your introduction. One of the reasons you got in was your struggles with the court system. And there have been some issues raised about your personal life, specifically allegations of abuse, having a significant amount of unpaid child support. So we would like to give you an opportunity to share your perspective on those allegations with us and our readers.
Thank you so much for that. And this is another area where I knew that family law really needs strong reform, is that the way it's currently structured, it's about maximizing litigation for the end goal and purpose of maximizing profits. And the largest opponents to shared parenting, what we refer to as 50-50 shared parenting, a rebuttable presumption, has been the Illinois Bar Association, which is really a union that represents its members' interest and not what's in the best interest of children. And the overwhelming social science has indicated that children need both parents. When we look at any statistics of high school dropouts, teen pregnancy, drug abuse, violent crime, there is one very common factor, and that's children growing up absent their a parent. And typically, unfortunately, it's been the father. And that is as a result of antiquated thinking, and our policies have just been very slow to keep up. And so when I recognized these things, I knew that I had a responsibility to stand up and say something and do something about that. And in regards to the allegations that have been made against me, again, having a standard of evidence of preponderance is ridiculous when we're talking about separating somebody from their children and their home, and that is the legal standard for getting orders of protection in the state of Illinois. And as a result, the red flag laws that are passing across this country have already been in place for many, many years, and it unfairly places somebody such as myself into a position where you have to prove your fitness. Well, I'm sorry, but that is not what the Constitution entails. That is not what our judicial system is supposed to be about. If you are accused of a crime, then you should, I told my state's attorney, Mike Neerheim, if I'm guilty of any crime, then I demand that you place me in front of a jury of my peers, and if I'm found guilty, I will do the time. But you cannot do that, and you know that you cannot do that, and they're abusing that system. There are many articles, even written on the Illinois Bar Association's own website, about the abuse of these orders of protection, and they're used to gain upper hands in custody proceedings, which is something, again, that I'm fighting to reform. Regarding
Are you saying in this case that you've been falsely accused?
Yes, ma'am, I am. And then in regards to the financial aspect, the child support. I have an older son in North Carolina. I paid child support on for over 12 years with no problems, no issues at all, until Lake County, Illinois imposed such a significant order on me that I was demanded to relinquish 40% of my income overnight. The average American family cannot, on Monday, wake up to their normal salary and on Tuesday lose 40% of their income and pay all of their bills and expenses. Illinois needs to seriously reform child support and the way that it is considered, and one of the best ways to do that is incorporating a rebuttable presumption of 50-50 shared parenting and setting reasonable support orders. National recommendations say don't exceed 15 to 20%. Well, Illinois adds on child care and extracurricular activities outside of the child support. And so then when you sum total everything, we're talking 40, 50, 60% of individuals' incomes, and we are artificially manufacturing what we call deadbeat fathers. These aren't deadbeat fathers. These are men that are struggling to pay their own bills, to keep a roof over their head and gas in their vehicle. And we use these archaic and draconian measures such as suspending driver's license, professional license. I even encountered a law on the Department of Natural Resources website that says that a person behind on child support cannot pick up roadkill. I mean, that is to the extent and nature with which we have demonized and treated fathers in the state of Illinois. And I had the ability to stand up and say something, and that's what I'm doing.
You noted in your intro you're running against 3 other opponents. 2 of those are pouring significant amounts of their personal wealth into the races, but yet you still threw your hat into the ring. So why do you think you have a shot at winning?
Because the Cubs won the World Series. We've all got a shot. As long as we have, I maybe I'm a little bit of a, an idealist in that, I kind of believe in that the American dream and the ability to achieve anything that we set our minds to. And really thinking about my children, I reflected on, I've always taught all 3 of my children, you can do anything that you put your mind to. And you might not have all of the answers or know exactly how it's going to play out, but if you pursue what you desire with your heart and with passion and with the right ethic, then I believe that you can achieve anything. And with the right support system, you can. And I think that Illinois is long overdue for somebody like myself that stands by what they believe and what they teach. And, is it a long shot? Sure, it certainly is. It is a long shot. But you know what? I believe in the people of Illinois, and I believe in doing the impossible.
Let's dig into some issues you'd face if you were elected governor. We as an edit board feel the most pressing issue facing the state is the unfunded pension liability. It's at least $130 billion. So how would you address the unfunded liability?
Well, of course, I'm a strong advocate of transitioning to what the private sector has been doing for quite some time, and that is to a 401k or a 403b style. I've been doing more research. I'm not a investment expert, but I try and do my homework, and it's my understanding that with a 403b there's lower administrative costs and there's more flexibility within those plans. But either way, transitioning to a 401k or a 403b, I believe, is the right direction to go. With that being said, I am, again, very strong on defending the Constitution, including our state Constitution, and we have a constitutional obligation to current and previous state employees to fulfill those obligations, and that's something that I would see through. But we cannot continue down the same pathway that we're on with, again, as you said, $130 billion at least. That's a conservative figure. Some of the credit rating agencies have us upwards of $250 billion, depending on how they calculate that. And so we would need to strive for a constitutional amendment to make that happen. But I believe in the interim, what we could do is open it up to much like what our state university retirement system has that they've enjoyed for over 20 years. And I believe Bruce Rauner had signed, I think, some legislation last year opening up to some downstate police and fire, which I think was a wise move. But we need to expand that across the state. We need our entire state to be able to have that option. Now, I've heard concerns from police and firefighters of, because we've got so many different pensions. There's not just the 5 large ones. We've got about over 600 different smaller pensions floating around out there. And some of their concerns that they've brought up to me is, well, are you talking about, taking from our pensions or no, absolutely not. I don't want to touch a pension that's working well. If that's working for you and it's working for your township, then you guys are doing the right thing, and we should be looking at what you're doing and following more of those examples across the state. We shouldn't get into the position where we have to sell police and fire equipment to fund pensions for retirees. We're really cutting our nose to spite our face, conducting such behavior. So.
I did want to clarify, you said you would strive for an amendment to make that happen. What type of amendment are you referring to?
A constitutional amendment.
To the one
from the defined contribution plan, so that
Okay.
all new state employees, all new hires would be automatically enrolled into a 401k or 403b style.
Okay, so not to change the current constitution where it says you cannot diminish or change previously earned benefits. That's not what you're referring to.
Well, yeah, so making a constitutional amendment to that.
Okay, but you wouldn't. Are you advocating to change what people have already earned?
No.
Okay, because that's
No.
that when people hear constitutional amendment with pensions, that's usually what they're
Right,
referring to.
and that's what I'm saying is that all current and previous state employees, we have that constitutional obligation to pay those pensions in their entirety.
Okay. Where the moving people to 401k or the other one you were referring to saves money in the future. I don't know that helps us with the accumulated unfunded liability that we have. How would you
Right.
recommend we try to fund that or pay that out?
Well, it's going to be the largest cost-saving measures I believe that we could begin to work to is working on reducing state spending. And some things I don't have direct control over, such as the over 7,000 units of local government. It's a kind of well spoken about number here in the state, where we have such a tremendous structure of small government here in a comparative analysis with the state of Texas that is significantly larger in landmass and population size. They've got just over 5,000 units of local government. And so they're spending significantly less than what we are, yet they're still supporting a much larger population size. And we have to realize that we can do a lot more with a lot less. And we saw in DuPage earlier last year where they consolidated 4 separate units of local government there. I don't remember each one of them, but they did this on their own. And they're anticipated to save well over $100 million for their local taxpayers. And so without Governor Rauner intervening there, they were already making those steps and those strides necessary in identifying where they can consolidate. And I think as governor, what I can do is to come into those local communities, speak with the people there on a local level, be much more accessible to local legislators as well as the citizens of those communities, and saying, okay, what can we work towards? What can we tabletop and roundtable together, and where can we make consolidations and or cuts together? And I believe it's that type of cooperation that we need across all levels of government to begin to save the money that we need to, so that we can fund those pensions, because you're right, it's a tremendous amount. And I would anticipate, even with shifting to a 403b style or 401k, it's probably going to take upwards of 30 to 40 years to pay down such a large amount.
For consolidation, are there areas in particular you would want to focus on? Particular units that are out there that you'd want to consider?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Again, this is all going to be done on more of a local level. In regards to the state, where can I cut state spending? Let's talk about that for a moment. I believe one of the largest areas that I can begin to address is the incarceration of individuals for victimless crimes, such as for possession of cannabis. We're spending billions of dollars a year in corrections, not only in corrections, but in the enforcement and adjudication process for victimless crimes. And specifically, what am I talking about? Drug crimes. Drugs, I believe, we've dealt with it from a criminal aspect. when all along I believe we should have been dealing with it from a health aspect, because many people that abuse drugs have underlying issues that have gone unaddressed, mental and emotional and physical health issues that have gone unaddressed. And so you may have an individual that left the military and they were wounded. I've had friends, a friend of mine was shot down in Afghanistan in a helicopter and is 100% disabled, suffered significant injury, and has to go through tremendous pain management. Well, the Veterans Administration will not prescribe medicinal cannabis for him, even for pain management. And so for him to do so, he has to go through, through outside providers, but many veterans are hesitant to do that because they're afraid of, the impact it could potentially have on any benefits that they're receiving, because it's still a Scheduled I substance. And so beginning to reform that, and I would really like to move away from the punitive model of punishing people for drugs. And address it as a health issue. The first step we need to make is the full legalization of cannabis. That is the very first step that I believe society is ready to accept, and I believe that that's one that we could achieve and get bipartisan support on. And so not only would we have the ability there to increase revenue into the state, but we also simultaneously have the ability to cut state spending by no longer incarcerating people for victimless crimes and putting them through the appropriate channels where they need it. If they're struggling with stronger drug addictions, well, then we need to get them into the proper mental health facilities that they need and help them to break that addiction cycle.
Do you have any statistics on how many people are currently incarcerated with the state corrections for the types of crimes that you would consider victimless?
I don't have that data on me. I want to say that it was around 10,000, but I mean, I've poured through so many statistics and data, I could be crossing my wires. But we're spending on average about $60,000 to $70,000 a year. I think that's a conservative figure for the incarceration phase of somebody. And we've got a great example. My old field operations director, Jason Spires, you might have seen some editorials on him recently out of Illinois Policy Institute, and some other articles have been done on him. He was just on the Bruce DeMont show and Beyond the Beltway, and he did 15 years in prison for a cannabis offense. And he was sentenced to 30 years, did 15 of that, got out, and he went through a successful work release program. And now he's been accepted to Stanford, and he's going to Stanford University. And right there, he's a small example of what I believe could be achieved to, on a long-term path, reduce our recidivism rate that we have, which sits around 50%. And I think the best way to reduce the recidivism rate is to break the old practices that we've been doing of put them in prison, use prison and a stiff criminal sentence as a quote-unquote deterrence, but then we ship them right back to the very communities that they came from with no prospects for a brighter future. And knowing with a criminal record that they have, that already in these communities that oftentimes have a very low economic opportunity as it were, and that's why many of them are already selling or doing drugs anyways, that if we were to kind of expand those work release programs and ensure that we kind of provide a model of mentorship, of developing skill sets, and because many don't even have the basic skill sets necessary for just basic functions in society of, managing a bank account, or, getting your car and insurance and all of these other things that we kind of take for granted because we grew into it and saw it and it was passed on to us. We need to help them transition with those skill sets necessary to be successful. And I believe on a long-term path, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to see Illinois from having a very high incarceration rate to we're going to have a steady decline, because we're going to begin dealing with drugs in a more appropriate manner. We're going to reduce recidivism costs. And as a result, what we're going to do is we're going to have safer communities, and we're going to transition men and women back into the lives of their families and into their communities. But they're going to stay on a much more solid ground because they know there's light at the end of the tunnel. I have a second chance at life, and this isn't going to be held against me for the rest of my life. Jason Spires, even in spite of his successes and what he's going on to do, he still has a $268,000 fine that he has to pay off. So in effect, he really has a life sentence for a victimless crime where he never harmed another person. We have to get away from that. Our police should be utilized to protect us from actual criminals that have criminal intent of harming persons and property. That's what our police should be used for.
We got on this topic by talking about state spending, and state spending is certainly something that's questionable how well it's been done in the Capitol in pretty much forever. Current fiscal year budget, for instance, that was approved is more than $1 billion out of whack. So we haven't talked to you about how you would, as governor, go about budgeting. I was on your campaign website, and you said you would support a multi-pronged approach to fiscal solvency that includes a balanced budget, cutting wasteful spending, and reducing excessive regulation. So share with us how this approach would work.
Well, the criminal justice aspect was one very large key aspect of that. And I think the next aspect we have to address is that of health care in the state of Illinois. Our Medicaid program, we're covering over 3 million citizens right now. And unfortunately, my opponents in J.B. Pritzker and Bruce Rauner, I can't speak necessarily for Sam McCann, I have not seen his position on this, but I've listened to J.B. Pritzker and Bruce Rauner, and this is common throughout our nation, that they go back and forth over is health care right, is it not a right, who should pay for it, who should be eligible for it, and I think that they're missing the mark, because in a sense, they're both the right and the left are kind of correct in their analysis, but they're incorrect on how should we go about reducing the cost, because it is eating up about 25% of our state budget, which is significant. And as a libertarian, we're sometimes painted with this stroke of the pen of, well, we don't care about the sick or the poor. That is completely not true. We do. We just believe that government is terrible about providing the solutions for that. I've been in conversation with I don't know if you guys are familiar with the direct primary care market of healthcare, and it's something that I've been researching and gaining a better understanding of. And it's really a free market solution to a very complex social issue that we're dealing with that's costing us a tremendous amount of money and also causing a very large political divide in our state. Direct primary care gives a consumer the ability to pay a monthly membership to a primary care provider, and that is one of the largest costs of healthcare coverage. Now, we got to be very clear. My mother, for instance, was on Medicaid not too long ago, and I had to take her to her doctor's appointments up in Antioch. And I can tell you that just because you have coverage, it doesn't mean that you're receiving adequate care. And I watched this happen several times over with my own mother. So it's very important to me that we have accessible health care, but that we have good health care that when people go, they are actually treated for what they're going to be seen for, and they're not treated like a stockyard animal and they spend 10 to 15 minutes and then they get them out the door. That's unacceptable to me. It's immoral to me that we treat our citizens in such a fashion that cannot afford a better health care option. And the direct primary care practice, it's a monthly membership that I believe the average membership is about $60 to $80 per month, and it gives a consumer the ability to have not only a personal relationship with their provider, but it also gives them much more accessible, or it makes them much more accessible to their provider. Oftentimes, 24 hours a day on call, they're able to call their doctor in the event of emergency, and they can go in and see, and the cost is significantly reduced because we're cutting out the middleman, we're eliminating the insurance there, and as a result, the cost savings that I'm seeing is upwards of 66% less than what the cost would be incurred inside an emergency room in Chicago. And that is a real model that is functioning, and it's working across the state. It's working across the nation. Michigan is just now beginning, I believe, to incorporate that through a government structure where they're running a pilot program for some of their state employees. These are the types of ideas that I believe that we should be encouraging and working to promote throughout our state, because if we can reduce cost on not only the public sector but also on the private sector, then we're doing right by all people and not just by, not just by taxpayers and not just by our public employees. I want to ensure that we're creating a healthcare market in the state of Illinois that allows for all people to be able to have affordable, accessible healthcare and care that when they go and receive, it's adequate and meets their needs. We don't have that right now. I don't believe that the models that are being proposed by J.B. Pritzker would serve us in a capacity that's going to do right by the people, and it's certainly not going to do right by our budget.
Okay. What suggestions do you have for increasing economic development in the state? On your campaign website, I noticed you said you would work to remove as many barriers to entry for small businesses as possible. So if you could elaborate on that in particular.
Well, yeah, Bruce Rauner did make a good move in reducing the cost to begin to open up like an LLC here in Illinois. That was a good move for small businesses here, but we have to go so many more steps beyond that. And I think the first place that we have to begin addressing is, in all honesty, is property taxes, because we're losing a lot of our talent pool out of the state. 30 to 40,000 people per year we're losing. And we have to analyze and say, well, what's driving them out of the state? Now, I'm from the South. I detest cold weather, but it's not the cold that's driving them out. It's absolutely directly linked to the financial mismanagement of Illinois. I live in Lake County, Illinois. We have the highest effective property taxes in the state, and I believe we have the 17th highest in the nation. I purchased the home in 2009. My taxes were $4,500 that year, and when we sold it in 2015, they were $9,000, just short of $9,000. We're talking about another mortgage on top of my mortgage, and that is in effect what is really driving people out of the state. And if we want to make businesses more viable here, we have to ensure that we're keeping our citizens in our trades here in the state, so that they're not leaving for Indiana or Iowa, where it's much cheaper to live. So we want to keep the talent here, but we also want to encourage businesses to open. So how do we do that? I don't know, because I'm not a business owner, and there are so many different types of businesses in Illinois. But what I can cite is that, a couple of examples of regulation where it has harmed small businesses. And I'll just give a couple small ones from out of Peoria. I spoke with a pizza shop owner there that had a large sign out. And he had to spend over $2,000 for the state just to prove that the bolts that were holding his sign up, and had been holding his sign up for years now, were the right thread count. These types of regulations is what's made it very difficult on small business owners, where they don't have a very large capital sitting to the side to pay for these additional expenditures that are coming unplanned for. They have very, very tight budgets that they must stick to so that their business can continue to open day in and day out, and they can pay their staff. Another one I can cite is that for a lawn care business, a gentleman that I spoke with near Peoria had his own lawn care business, and he had to pay, I believe, over $800 just to be able to use Roundup that we could go and buy at Walmart and spray on our weeds. Well, as a small business owner, he has additional regulations and fines, or I would say a fine, some sort of a fee there assessed to him because he's a business owner. Yet a private citizen can go and buy it and use it all day long. And these are the types of things that we have to really break down in each different area of business and begin to remove those barriers and make it more business friendly. I'm not a fan of what we dub corporate welfare, and providing these multi-million-dollar tax breaks to companies like Amazon to lure them to the state. I would much rather, instead of providing I'll just throw out a figure here, a $3 million tax break to Amazon so that they could bring 10,000 jobs. I would rather we provided, that $3 million break to small business owners that are already existing in the state of Illinois. And if they could each hire one employee, well, we did effectively the same thing, but we didn't provide a tax break to a very large corporation that, frankly speaking, they have the capital, they can pay the taxes, they can pay the fees necessary to open up those businesses. I would rather protect small business owners and existing businesses within the state and build from the foundation that we have here right now.
Where we stay in property taxes, I did notice you would be a fan of a 5-year property tax freeze, I believe is on your website.
Yes.
Can that happen and the needs of the state and local governments still be met if we're freezing them for that long?
I believe that it can. I believe that it can, again, with the intent of we have to curb state spending. If we don't do one, we can't reasonably do the other. And I would agree with you there that if we don't rein in state spending, it probably would not work on a 5-year freeze, because they're going to continue to outspend the revenue that we have coming in. And that's what we have to address. We have to address what is causing us to go into debt. It's excessive spending. It's not a revenue problem, but the more people and more businesses we lose from the state, we're definitely going to begin feeling the strain of a revenue problem, because we're losing our tax base through our property owners and through our corporations. And then we're going to definitely have a lot more financial issues if we don't do that. So curb the state spending. Definitely, I believe that we can enact that 5-year property tax freeze, allow people's wages to kind of catch up and begin to kind of lower that, that effect of the high property taxes that we have now, and then also incorporate a 2/3 voters referendum. And if those local townships and municipalities, excuse me, if they can, I got a frog in my throat, if they can handle raising those taxes, then I don't think it's unreasonable that the majority of the local populace gets a say on that, and they vote it in and say, yep, you know what, we're doing well, our economy's doing good, jobs are firing off, businesses are opening, we're doing pretty good. Let's go ahead and open it up, and we can incorporate this additional consumption tax that can go to fund, more towards education or whatever they're choosing.
Let's talk about education in schools, because that's linked to property tax, that's linked to state spending. You say on your campaign website that you'd like to see public schools funded primarily by local taxpayers and private donations. Can you walk us through, how you see education spending, the state role and local?
So on a state level, I want to ensure that every single student across the state receives the exact same funding. I do not want the state to be held responsible, or kind of a finger pointed at the state to say, well, you're picking winners in Lake County and you're providing additional funding to Lake County, and maybe over in Tazewell County, they're not receiving the same amount of dollars per student. I want to ensure that every single student across the state receives the exact same funding from the state on a state level. On a local level, if they want to channel additional revenue into their education system, then that should be on that local township and school board. It should be on them to access that additional funding. And so if that's, again, if they want to pass that have that 2/3 voters referendum, increase or put an additional tax somewhere, and they want to then channel that towards their school district, and then they have that option to do that. But on a state level, my job is to ensure that every student receives the exact same funding across the board, and I believe that we can achieve that.
So you would want to change, the recent school funding reform took kind of that model where, at least hypothetically, everyone was supposed to be getting the same amount of money, and is now
Right.
directing any additional money toward the districts that do need more help, either because they have lower property tax wealth, they have a large number of students who are receiving free and reduced lunch. There's like 27, I think, different things that require how much you get. So the new formula is trying to say we're not picking winners and losers. We're trying to help the areas that do need more help. Would you be interested in changing that funding formula changes?
I would have to take a closer look
Okay.
at the exact, because there is a lot of different criteria, right? It is over 20 different criteria,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know those. I do have teachers on my staff to help
Yeah.
me break some of that stuff
Yeah.
down, but I mean, if they're given a block grant for for their students there, and look, my recommendation is that the money is going towards students and teachers and programs. But allow those local districts to spend the money how they choose. And I believe that it's very unwise to have six-figure administrative salaries and to have seven-figure pensions and premium health care benefits. I think it's a terrible waste of money, and that they're taking away from students and teachers and programs. But if that's how they choose to run it, I am a fan of decentralizing government. I don't want to mandate from Springfield how on a local level they choose to do business, because they know what's best. But I do want to be out there encouraging voters to hold their legislators responsible, hold their school boards responsible, and ensure that the money that is being allocated, it's going to the proper places. But we have to have people involved more on a local level, and it shouldn't be getting mandated from Springfield.
So then it
So-
sounds like you might, excuse me.
Go ahead.
It sounds like you might support the idea that's been floated about moving teacher pensions from the state to local districts, that in fact local districts would support
That is
teacher
correct.
pensions.
I am, and and for instance, recently there was legislation proposed to pay all downstate teachers $40,000 annual salary. And while I believe that might be good intentioned, I don't believe that whoever proposed that considered the negative consequences to something like that. That if you're attempting to mandate that down to the downstate level, where the annual salary isn't as much as the collar counties and Cook County, then you're placing an unfair burden on that district to decide, do they keep teachers on staff? Do they lay teachers off? Who do they pay? Because if we're not funding something like that, then that's very unwise. And I believe that is the type of legislation we've seen come out of Springfield that does harm to communities, and it places them in the position of making hard choices. We shouldn't do that to them. They know their finances better than anyone. As long as we're ensuring on a state level, we're providing the exact same funding to them as we are to the rest of the state, then we're doing our job. Now, if I need to get down there and kind of intercede and work with parents and work with teachers because the spending isn't going well, I'll go down there and have the conversation. But I can't mandate. That is not the governor's job.
What about
So-
the, oh, go ahead.
So in your scenario, though, if you're making sure that the state funds exactly equally for all pupils, as Kate alluded to, different areas of the states have different property tax revenue, property tax base,
Right.
which are frozen in your scenario. So in that case, is it fair that a child in rural southern Illinois who's in a district with a low property tax rate, or tax base rather, is getting a significantly less funding in total than a child in a wealthy suburb?
Well, is it fair? It's a good question.
Because it's well documented that education offerings vary.
Certainly. Most certainly, yeah. I mean, I grew up in Louisiana. I grew up in a very rural environment. There was my graduating class was about 30 people. And so we did not necessarily have, in fact, there's no necessarily about it. We didn't have a lot of funding. We didn't have a lot of programs. But you know what? I got a great education. We have to understand that more dollars don't always equal towards better outcomes. That oftentimes it's ensuring that we have good teachers on staff and that they're committed to their job. And when you live in a rural community like where I grew up and like what a lot of our downstate is, they don't. And what's an advantage? Well, typically they have smaller class sizes. Typically the teachers can devote more one-on-one personal time there. And a lot of these teachers grew up in these communities and they came back because they have a passion for teaching and seeing children succeed. And that's the environment we want to foster. And so Is it fair? Well, I mean, is it fair that more funding on a property tax level goes in Cook County or Lake County, but they have a larger class size and the teacher doesn't devote as much time and the teachers are suffering burnout where downstate they may not be, and they have maybe a bit more relaxed atmosphere and administration, and they're more committed to their job and their students, and there's a lot of unfairness about life, and government isn't always going to make things fair for everybody. But it's definitely my job and my intent to ensure that I am doing the best possible by every citizen in the state of Illinois and being responsible with the money that we do take from its citizens. And I think the fairest way to do that is providing the equal funding across the state.
What about the private donations from others you're referring to for education funding?
Yeah, so providing tax incentives to those that how did I want to kind of word this? I want to encourage behaviors and mannerisms throughout our society that are positive, not negative. Oftentimes, what we see is, we see fines and fees and things put in place to deter behavior and not encourage good behavior. And what I want to do is to encourage a market where if somebody wants to send private donations to education, directly to education within their communities, well then that they get some sort of a tax credit for that. And education is not unless you're talking about some sort of a nonprofit, well, it's not tax deductible. But if we could encourage that type of behavior where people are like, you know what, I love my school, this is my alma mater, I want to see my kids do well here, I'm willing to donate $1,000 every year. And then if they were to then, get $1,000 tax break or tax write-off, we're encouraging the type of behavior that we want to see out of people where they're now responsible and they can feel good about where their tax dollars are going because, well, they got to choose, and they got to choose education where it's so very important, and parents know it's important. I mean, I have 2 children in public schools, and I want to see them do well, and that's something that I would do as a parent to say, wait, you mean I can choose to give more money to education and I get a tax write-off on that? That's encouraging good behavior.
We've been talking about property taxes. What about the state's income tax structure? Is there any changes you would make there?
Maybe one. I don't like a progressive tax model. I like the flat tax model. And I don't believe that the income tax rate is a large deterrent for people. I mean, you're looking on a regional level, our income tax rate is reasonable. I would like to see it lower, but primarily I would like to see it lower for people living at and below the poverty line. And the only thing that I would consider doing is waiving income tax for those at and below the poverty line to where they can write off 100% of their income to where they're not effectively paying any income tax. And with the intent of, I believe that we could recover that lost income tax by reducing where we're spending in the criminal justice area, as well as through the legalization of cannabis.
The 2-year budget impasse that the state went through caused the unpaid bill backlog to skyrocket to about $16 billion, and that was reduced due to borrowing to pay off some of the bills. Would you have supported borrowing money to pay off our debt?
That's a hard one because while it was, again, I believe it was with good intent, I believe it was in poor practice because now we have to incur the additional interest that goes with the borrowing. And with having such a low credit rating, we incur higher interest rates as a result of that. And that is additional money placed onto the backs of taxpayers. I don't think that we've acted aggressively enough in addressing state spending, and I don't believe that we've acted aggressively enough in working across the state very passionately about consolidation of local units of government. If we had done that, and if we were to do that, I believe we would see a much more immediate effect where wow, we're now going to start seeing, okay, we're not really reducing state spending yet, but what we are doing is making those steps and those measures to send a strong message to the credit rating agencies that, look, we're going to reduce the size of government, we're going to reduce how much spending that we are doing, and then as a result, we're going to improve our credit rating, and we're going to begin to pay our finances down. I don't like borrowing to pay debt. I think it's a bad practice to get into, and I think that it just digs a bigger hole.
So just to clarify, though, I think in this case, they were paying off bills that were accruing 12% interest payment, penalties, and the state was able to bond out at, I think, 3.5%, 4%?
It's between 3 and 4.
Something like that.
Okay, well.
So you're still opposed to that just on the principle of it sends a bad message?
No, I'm not opposed to it on kind of an immediate savings, and I thought that I had read that maybe I just crossed my wires, but no, I would be a fan of saving money, right?
Okay.
And on a lower interest rate, and we save money. Yes, it's a smart move. On practice alone, I don't like borrowing to pay down debt.
Okay.
But on a restructuring and a refinance to a lower interest rate, yes, refinancing to a lower interest rate. I refinanced my home from 4.95 to 2.75. And
So you're saying it would depend on the circumstances?
on the circumstances,
Got it.
correct.
Okay. Good deal. Do you have a question?
I want to swing back to the, what'd you call that? The direct,
Primary care?
direct primary care. So that makes, I just kind of did some math in my head. So if you have 500 subscribers at $80 a month, that would give the provider $480,000, which that's living wage. But then, so what happens if there's some sort of, oh, geez, John, you need a pacemaker? How's that covered? Is there catastrophic insurance
Great question.
included in that? or
Yeah,
what-
so correct. Yeah, so expanding onto that, what they do is that, and what these direct primary care physicians recommend, at least the ones that I've spoken with, is that you still carry a catastrophic coverage. But what they're able to do is, because now they no longer have a primary care associated with that health insurance, it significantly lowers health insurance cost on that family. Because now their direct primary care is shifted out of this insurance plan to, well, I'm just paying $80 a month. And so then it significantly cuts down. And one of the examples they gave me is that one of her, this particular doctor, she had a large family of 9, but by them shifting from their current insurance model to the direct primary care, they were saving $1,500 a month. Now, their average are saving $300 to $500 a month for them. And then they're just carrying the catastrophic clause with maybe a $5,000 deductible. So
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Did I answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Do you think term limits should be instituted in this state?
I do. Yes.
Explain on what offices, for how long?
I think on all statewide offices, I don't believe that legislators should exceed 12 years. I believe that that is kind of an adequate time for them to make any positive steps and headway that they want to make with their ideas, because it does take time to incorporate solutions. And of course, I mean, if you're a freshman representative, it's going to take time to build a rapport, learn the system, develop relationships. This takes time, and not just doing it on a local level, but on a state level as well. They have to do this. And I think that 12 years is an adequate time for somebody to serve in that capacity. I would like to eliminate in its entirety pensions and retirement health care for legislators. I don't believe that that's necessary. I think that if you serve in public office, i.e. if I'm elected governor and I do 4 years and then I become a public school teacher, then that service, that time should count towards my retirement now as a public employee. Outside of that, I do not believe in pensions or continued health care benefits for legislators.
What about statewide constitutional officers? Would it also be the 12 years?
Yes.
Okay.
yes, I would like to see that across the board.
Okay. Civility in politics is something many people would like to see more of. So in that vein, we ask you, what has Bruce Rauner done well during his term as governor?
I think that Bruce Rauner has done a few things well. I like that he reduced the cost on LLCs, and that's a very business-friendly model and approach, and I applaud what he did there. Oh, goodness. I knew that question was going to come, and I was like, I'm going to have something good to say about. I think that Bruce overall has been very civil. He incurs a tremendous amount of attacks being governor, and you're going to when, especially in partisan politics, that's what we see. And I do want to see more civility. I think that not only should we be emulating that example towards society, because what we're doing and how we're acting and behaving as legislators, figureheads, that's also going to carry over to our constituents and how they act and behave towards one another. And nobody's perfect. I mean, nobody is. But, I applaud Bruce for being willing to stand up and do the job of governor, to be willing to run again, knowing he knows that with signing some of the legislation that he did, that he fractured his base in the Republican Party, and he's still choosing to run for his own reasons, whatever those may be. And I have to believe that, I hope at least, that he's doing it for good reasons. And any person that stands up and says, you know what, I'm going to run for politics, you're going to take some licks on the chin. And and I applaud any person that's at least willing to enter the arena.
If you're elected, would you live in the governor's mansion here in Springfield?
I wasn't expecting that question. I would love to live in a mansion. I grew up in a trailer park. I would love to live in a mansion. Honestly, you know what? And this is something that I kind of thought long and hard about, is that I think that as the executive leader, you should live in the communities. And while I would like to live in a mansion, I think that the majority of my time should be spent across all of the state. And so the idea I had for that was, well, I'll just, with my newfound salary, I'll just purchase a fifth wheel camper and I'll live in every county around the state. That way I'm accessible to the people and to the local legislators. And because there's 102 counties here, and we always hear that downstate voters feel forgotten. Well, how do I make sure that they feel that they're heard? Well, what better way than to live in their communities with them, and where they can, they know that, Governor Jackson's right up the road in the, KOA campground, and and he's going to have a town hall every Friday evening where we can sit around and have a barbecue and we can talk about local issues. And after a couple weeks, he's going to another county and doing the same thing.
Okay, well, we thank you for meeting with us today, and we invite you to give a brief closing statement as to why you think voters should make you the next governor of Illinois.
Well, I want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for so much for at least giving me the opportunity to come down here and have my solutions and ideas heard. I believe that I'm a very viable candidate, and I really believe so much in that Americans are built on overcoming adversity and the impossible. We had men and women who fled from another country seeking a better way of life, and they were willing to risk life and limb to ensure a better future for their families and to ensure that they did not live in tyranny. But they had to be brave to do that. They had to be brave to make that journey. They had to be brave in order to stand up to a tyrannical form of government and one in which was oppressing them. And I'm asking Illinois to take a chance and to be brave. It's not going to be easy, but I feel that I'm the best person in this job or that's currently running right now that can lead this state back to a fiscally sound platform, and one in which respects the individual rights of all people and doesn't just protect those that voted for me or those that donated to my campaign. I'm not tied to any political action committees. I'm not tied to any large corporations. I'm not tied to any wealthy people. I'm just a father that wants best for his children and for your children, and I believe that I'm the man to get the job done.